Ukrainian spring offensive. Will it happen? The answer is probably no. It appears that the long awaited, highly touted Ukrainian spring offensive isn't going to happen after all. This, at least, is according to Ukrainian officials who have said that they have not received sufficient military assistance from the West, from the United States, from NATO, that would enable them to carry out an offensive with the prospects of success. And that therefore Ukraine is going to continue to wage what they call positional warfare until July. July, of course, is the NATO summit, and Ukraine hopes to prevail upon NATO, the United States, and other European nations to step up to the plate, so to speak, and provide the assistance, the critical assistance it deems that it must have to successfully defeat the Russian military. This includes F-16 fighters. This includes long-range missiles such as the ATACMS missiles. Both of these are systems that the United States has not been willing to share with Ukraine out of fear of escalating the conflict with Russia to a point that it could be deemed as posing an existential threat to Russia, thereby triggering Russia's nuclear doctrinal response. But the fact of the matter is, July is too late. It's already too late. Ukraine has been losing this war, is losing this war, and will lose this war. As President Zelensky noted a couple months ago, that they haven't received this material that they've requested by August, that it's too late. And too late means it's all over for Ukraine. We now know that Ukraine is not going to receive this material, this much needed material, until well after August, which means turn out the lights, the party's over. Unfortunately for Ukraine, this war is going to end. This war is going to end sometime this summer or early fall. And it's going to end in a decisive Ukrainian defeat. This has been my 2-minute topic to remember. Knowledge is.
Yeah, so that's the 2-minute topic from Scott Ritter, and it's really important because he's saying that it's not going to happen because the weapons aren't going to get there fast enough. August, we're talking about transfers all the way into August. And I want to show you what Foreign Policy magazine actually had to say about this, because they are verifying, they are confirming what Scott Ritter is saying. And a lot of people like to say, well, there was not an accurate reading on the war, and Russia was supposed to win within the first 2 weeks. That's what they said. And, people like Scott were wrong. Well, war is unpredictable, and we can only do our best. But given the reality of the situation for Ukraine, that back in that time, there wasn't a lot known about what kind of fight Russia would engage in. Now we know it's a war of attrition. And now we know that Ukraine is not doing so well in this war of attrition. And here is Foreign Policy magazine's report on it. Ukraine's spring offensive is waiting on weapons. Every day Kiev waits, the Russians dig deeper trenches. So this was written on 4/20, April 20th. And I'm going to read you some of it to show you exactly what the Western media, this is the deep state, this is the neocon foreign policy establishment admitting that this counteroffensive is in trouble. So in the West, the eerie calm across much of Ukraine's frozen battlefield, apart from the meat grinder in Bakhmut, has brought a sense of unease. Many are wondering, what's the holdup for an offensive? For weeks, top Ukrainian officials from Zelensky on down have been telegraphing that they will not start another major military onslaught on Russian lines without more weapons from the U.S. and the West. In late March, Zelensky said in a message on Telegram that Ukraine could not begin its renewed counteroffensive until Western nations sent more weapons, including artillery, tanks, and high-mobility rocket artillery. Western officials have also to date rebuffed Ukrainian requests for F-16 fighter jets and long-range artillery that can reach Russian lines, which have moved out of the 40-plus mile range of the U.S.-provided guided multiple launch rockets that the Pentagon began sending to Ukraine last summer. And on those multiple launch rockets, those guided multiple launch rocket systems, Ukraine has consumed hundreds more of these than the 4,000 to 5,000 that the military industrial complex Lockheed Martin produces alone in a single year total. So we're talking about Ukraine wasting away these wonder weapons while the US is unable to fortify a new Ukrainian army. That's what they're saying. We're waiting for ammunition to arrive from our partners, Zelensky said in an interview with Japan's Yomiuri Shimbun newspaper in late March. The Ukrainian leader added that the counteroffensive can't start yet. We can't send our brave soldiers to the front lines without tanks, artillery, and long-range rocket systems. And the call from Kiev is getting louder. Ring, ring, ring. Echoing the frustration in Kiev, Olitsky Danilov, the secretary of Ukraine's National Security Defense Council, told the Associated Press in an interview on Tuesday that Ukraine was frustrated with allies that promise one thing and do a completely different one. With some allies that they promise one thing and do a completely different one, even though he said Ukraine's allies are working to build up Kiev's military to the level of capability needed to take on the Russian lines. He added that if Ukraine isn't ready, nobody will start unprepared. So, I mean, this is logical, right? Ukraine's military is not incompetent, despite the fact that they send so many forces to Bakhmut to get slaughtered in the thousands upon thousands, but they're not incompetent in the sense that they're not going to go out there without any weapons. I mean, the image comes to mind of literal brigades and combat units going out to the front lines without anything, right? That's the image that should come to your mind, and they're not willing to participate in that embarrassment. And you know that Ukraine's military is under U.S. direction. It is. That's what the Pentagon leaks have told us, and that's what we've always known if you had a thinking brain. So with Ukraine's military under U.S. direction, it is the United States, in fact, that is saying, don't do the spring counteroffensive until we're ready. And they're not sending the weapons. Neither is the European allies. And so Kiev is getting quite angry about that. The spring thaw has brought up top-of-the-line German Leopard tanks to Ukraine and the promise of U.S.-provided Abrams tanks arriving in their wake. But in the corridors of Kiev, there's concern it's too little too late. U.S. officials will admit on the record even that Abrams tanks are months away from arriving as the Pentagon looks at its stocks to see what it can send. And worse yet, the Leopard tanks arriving from 8 different countries fire different rounds, meaning that Ukrainians can't buy munitions for their newly tricked-out ground forces in bulk. Until the cavalry arrives, Ukraine remains a paper leopard. So that's a play on the paper tiger narrative, meaning that they have the tanks, or they might get the tanks at some point, but they won't have anything to fire them with, meaning that they are dead in the water. They're not going to reach the front lines because you can't do anything with the tank that can't fire. Sasha Ustonova, Ukrainian lawmaker, told Foreign Policy magazine that the U.S. military delivered far less than what Valery Zaluzhny, Ukraine's top general, has asked for from the Pentagon. But U.S. military aid is only coming from in dribs and drabs, with the Biden administration nearing the end of funding for weapons left that it can pull off Pentagon shelves to give to the Ukrainians. Ustonova said that Ukraine hoped to begin the offensive in April, but the lack of weapons has pushed the launch date back indefinitely. So Scott Ritter said it's not going to happen. Foreign Policy magazine is saying this is not going to happen indefinitely. What does indefinitely mean? Does indefinitely mean that it's going to happen sometime? We don't know, but indefinitely means essentially it's not going to happen, and it's definitely not going to happen in April. We only got a week of April left, and for those who may watch a clip later of this or the replay later, it's even worse, right? We may be in late April, May. It won't have happened then either, okay? So we as a military want to have all the weapons now, but of course it's impossible in the current situation, says one Ukrainian military official, speaking on condition of anonymity. Of course, we need the jets, but it's not a question of the coming months, to be honest. The U.S. is set to announce Thursday plans to send another $325 million additional ammo and anti-armor weapons at the meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Germany, Politico first reported. The prospects of F-16 fighter jets and long-range U.S. Army tactical missile systems are still tied down in internal debates, leading to frustration on Capitol Hill. It's beyond time that this administration, along with our allies, provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to win. This is Michael McCall, he's the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman. He's a Republican. You probably have seen him on Meet the Press talk about how the U.S. needs to vote. Congress needs to vote on a war with China over Taiwan. We need to do more than just give Ukraine enough for survival. Some Western officials concerned about the long lead time for Ukrainian pilots and maintaining jets have hinted that F-16s could be provided to Ukraine in a post-invasion scenario. But Ukraine is fighting a war that's measured in days and weeks, not months and years. It aims to claw back as much territory as possible from Russian occupiers in the Donbass and southern Ukraine. After an autumn push, Ukrainian forces drove Russian troops from the Dnieper River and recaptured Kherson, just north of the Crimea Peninsula. That's the big target. A further spring offensive could see Ukraine try to push south, though it would face fortified Russian defenders across the river, or try to push east into Russian-occupied territories in Zaporozhye province before slashing supply lines into Crimea, risking an amphibious assault. But as the wait draws longer, Ukrainian officials are worried that Russians have finally begun adapting their tactics enough to make a difference. Equipped with longer-range missiles, Russian ships are firing precision munitions at urban areas from as far as the Caspian Sea, said Ustanova, a Ukrainian lawmaker, making it impossible for Ukraine to counterattack. Long-range Su-35s, Russia's fourth-generation fighter, can also fire from Russian airspace. So this is Foreign Policy Magazine. These are Ukrainian officials. And this is the most important thing, because I'm going to close up this article. We don't have to go on and on, because the point here is clear, okay? This is what is clear. Indefinitely. The lack of weapons has pushed the launch date back indefinitely. This is from a Ukrainian lawmaker, Sasha Ustanova. This is from their interpretation of what Zaluzhny and Ukraine's defense ministry, this is what they are saying. Okay, so it's very important to understand that Scott Ritter is right, because the What Foreign Policy Magazine is saying it, and they're saying it with the utmost of worry and hesitance. They are panicking. Okay, the Western media is panicking because Ukraine is panicking because the United States and NATO have nothing left. How many times have we said they have nothing left? Here on this channel, we've said it. We've said it over and over and over again with folks I brought on here from the Duran, from Scott Ritter, over and over and over again. Well, why do we say it so often? It's not because we like to hear ourselves talk. No, that's not it. We don't like to just hear ourselves talk, or we don't like to gotcha. We don't like to be right. It's because when the Western corporate media, the Western mainstream media, it's a mouthpiece of the military-industrial complex. It's a mouthpiece of the neocon foreign policy establishment. When they begin to express panic, when they begin to express worry, you better believe it. You better believe it. And why should we be believing it? Because Ukraine itself is saying it, and because this situation has been ongoing. During that offensive that Ukraine launched, right, in mid-2022, when they took back Kherson, Kharkov, when they took those Donbass regions from Russia, and of course the Donbass forces, the militias, when they took them back, they exhausted all that they had, especially of the Soviet era technology. They basically, ran through an entire military. And ever since then, the United States and NATO have been unable to come to any kind of agreement that will supply Ukraine with what it needs to take it back. And the reason for this is because the United States and the collective West never prepared for a long war with Russia. That was never in its preparations. And why was it not in its preparations? Because the military-industrial complex does not make preparations for strategic gain. No matter how much the collective West, the United States in particular, wants regime change on Russia, wants to destroy the Donbass, wants to obliterate the existence of Russians in that region, no matter how much it wants to assert its control over all of what was known as Ukraine after the Soviet Union, no matter how much it wants to expand NATO, it was not prepared for a long war because the military-industrial complex cares about its profits more. It cares more about how can it make short-term gain on the present, not how can it help a government meet, how can it help the neocons meet their policy objectives. That's not what comes first to Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, to Raytheon. No, 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 no. Only so insofar as those objectives serve their profits. It's a just-in-time model. They never had enough to begin with. That's why leaked Pentagon documents are talking about South Korea. That's why we heard months ago South Korea's got to send their artillery. How about getting those shells in Israel? How about we just pull from every damn place in the world uh, where we have parked our weapons? That's the logic here. That's the logic here. All right. That's what's happening because that's all they have. This is a failure. This is a failure waiting to happen, but it's a war of attrition, meaning this situation is not going to collapse anytime soon. It's going to continue on this path. But Foreign Policy Magazine there did admit it. And so when we're talking about this Ukraine spring counteroffensive, don't wait on it. Don't hold your breath, because if you hold your breath too long, you may not make it out. You may pass out. You may not make it out on the other side. You may pass out because this isn't happening anytime soon. But does Ukraine have time? Does Ukraine really have time? Foreign Policy Magazine says no, Ukraine doesn't have the time. We have been saying here on this channel, no, Ukraine doesn't have the time. Why is that? Well, Russia has 300,000 troops ready to go to fight this war of attrition. How long can Ukraine really hold out? That's why in that article, you had them admit, right? You had them admit that the Russians are going to keep digging trenches. They're going to continue to dig trenches, meaning that they're going to fortify their position and they're going to make moves. And this isn't even to take into account Russia's air superiority and now what is really a total military superiority on all fronts, on all levels of combat. Russia has the manpower advantage, the advantage in the air, and it has the ability to grind and grind and grind. Wow, this is really important. While I said, wow, that shows my Bostonian coming out. But while the Russian economy and the Russian political system consolidates, this is the big problem for the collective West. It's not just that Ukraine is a quagmire, that the collective West will not get what they want out of. They're not going to get Ukraine to take back territory, but that's small fries. Small fries. That's not the objective. The objective isn't, oh, we need to take back all of Ukraine. No, the collective West in the United States, what do they want? They want to defeat Russia. And that's nowhere near the case. There is nothing indicating that Russia's government is going to fall. Putin's legitimacy, the United Russia Party's legitimacy has skyrocketed, not just in Russia, but around the world. We've seen polls. Even in the United States, we've seen polls that Putin is more popular now. Putin is more popular now in the United States than he was before the war. That is how much that this war has backfired on the collective West. So it's about this total war is not just about guns and tanks and air power. I mean, on the battlefront, that's what's going to essentially decide things, yes. But politically, this is deteriorating even further when you have the Ukraine side saying we cannot even fight right now. And that means that the United States is saying you can't fight right now. You're not going to embarrass NATO. You're not going to do it. You're not going to embarrass NATO on the battlefield. Things are bad enough. They don't care about Ukrainians. They don't care about anything. They don't care about the world economy, the grain situation, any of that. They don't care about oil price inflation. No. They care about their main objective of regime change on Russia, and that is failing. And they're not going to try to participate in a spring counteroffensive if that objective is failing anyway. So this is how pathetic things have become. It's pathetic. It's absolutely emblematic of the state of things in the collective West, especially the U.S. side. The U.S. side is showing its true colors here. And now we're seeing that all these grand plans, this bravado, this hubris, we're going to run a spring counteroffensive, and it's going to be awesome and amazing. It was all a lie. It was a lie from the beginning. The collective West was trying to skirt over with public relations, with propaganda, skirt over the inherent weaknesses of its policy in Ukraine of its proxy war. The inherent weakness being you're not going to take a vassal puppet state like Ukraine, a fascist state that you installed. You're not going to take that, and you're not going to take that and defeat a major power like Russia without throwing everything you have at it. And even when you did, you didn't even have enough. You miscalculated. That is what the collective West did. They miscalculated this situation. Everyone was saying the collective West, the United States, right? All these high-level officials, all the way down to the most mediocre liberals and neocons, right? They were all saying, oh, well, Russia miscalculated. You can see on that foreign policy article, they were saying Russia miscalculated, right? And now they're finally getting their stuff together. That's absolutely not how it's been going. How it's been going is that Russia has decided, after careful consideration, especially in the first several months of the conflict, that it understood that the West was not going to stop. So now that NATO, right, after April, this was made in April, after NATO, the United States especially, and of course, Britain, the UK, after they decided to nix a peace deal in early April between Ukraine and Russia, when they undermined that, Russia said, well, we are going to fight a war of attrition now because you're not going to stop. But also, we need to make sure that Russia is not bled dry by this. You don't think Russia learned from Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s? You don't think that Russia's learned from the Wolfowitz Doctrine? You don't think Russia has learned from what the United States and the collective West has done around the world, endless war over the last several decades, really ever since World War II? You don't think Russia's learned from that? Russia has indeed learned from that. And that's why Russia is prevailing in this war, and this Ukrainian spring counteroffensive is nothing but a fantasy. Nothing but a fantasy.